Welcome back to Light the Fuse, the Mission Impossible podcast that feels like a warm blanket on a cold, snowy night.
Yep, that's us. A warm blanket.
Wow, Charles. Wow. You left me out in the cold with that one, but that's fine. That's fine. We are back. We are going through the making of Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. How you feeling about that, Charles?
I feel good. On to part 2. We just, we started the production last week, and now I'm ready to dive in here and get really into the shooting of this thing.
Well, before we do that, Charles, I got to give some shout outs, obviously, my favorite part of the show. I want to give a shout out to my favorite album and their wonderful host, Jeremy Dillon. Each week, Jeremy talks to a different musician, songwriter, filmmaker, actor, and talks about the music they love and how it's influenced them and their work. And you and I are supposed to go on very soon, so I'm very excited about that. And I also want to give a shout out to John B. So thank you both so much for supporting this show. And without you, we could not do it. So let's get it. We're still shooting, Charles. We're still in production. So you ready to jump back in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Shooting officially started on August 20th, 2014 in Vienna, Austria. And with that, let's talk about the opera sequence. The idea came when McQuarrie was in Paris at the opera with his family, and he thought someone should shoot an action sequence in there. His wife brought him to the ballet, and he thought this would be a great place to set a sequence that opens the movie, and it actually originally was the opening sequence, but they kept stacking more and more things in front of it. And we'll talk about the airplane sequence later, but I believe that was the cold open initially, right?
Well, initially they were talking about having the opera sequence be the cold open, but then they just kept putting things in front of it until it's what is it, 40 minutes into the movie or something?
Yeah, that's right. So that it wound up the cold open, but the opera was supposed to be the cold open. Yeah. It's very interesting how modular these movies are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So The Key to Reserva, the Martin Scorsese short film that was a long-form advertisement for a champagne, was used as a proof of concept that McQuarrie showed to Cruise and the studio. Of course, that short was entirely done as a reference to Hitchcock's remake of his own movie, The Man Who Knew Too Much, which has a fantastic opera set piece. If you haven't seen that movie, do so immediately. It's amazing.
We're also not certain how they settled on Vienna, but it was very good they did because Vienna's wide boulevards made it possible to back up and get great angles on the exterior of the building. They actually only had 5 days to shoot the Opera House. Rebecca Ferguson had to quickly get over her fear of heights because the first thing they shot was her coming off the roof. Wade Eastwood did his best to ease her into some of the stunt work she had to do, but they were on the roof right from the start. Initially, McQuarrie was going to have Ethan and Ilsa run out the back door, but Cruise said, "This is Mission Impossible. I'm not going out the back door. We're going off the roof." So they did.
McQuarrie says that 3 of the 5 days they were filming Ethan and Ilsa's escape from the roof. So ultimately, they didn't have much time to shoot in the actual opera house. All of the time they did have inside was spent shooting the stuff that sets up the geography of everything. The orchestra and opera singers you see in the movie are the actual orchestra and authentic opera singers from Vienna.
Composer Joe Kramer came to set and supervised the opera because McQuarrie wanted to make sure the music timed out just right. Mainly, though, Kramer told him not to worry so much about syncing up the sequence with the music. Of course, this came up later in the process, but Nessun Dorma from Turandot became Ilsa's theme in the movie, which we love.
I think neither of us can really pronounce it very well, but the famous melody from Nessun Dorma, whatever it is from, I don't know, Turandot, I think is whatever it is. Anyway, that it's cool that evolved into Ilsa's theme.
Yeah, I love that.
The rest of the opera sequence, which is probably the majority of it, was shot later in the production in London. LH2 was the only soundstage big enough to hold the opera set. Production designer Jim Bissell and his team built the entire backstage and the 2 boxes with a giant green screen the size of the Vienna Opera, where they used plates that were shot by the plate unit. Everything you see in the backstage area was built by Bissell's team from scratch.
That guy is a genius.
Yeah.
They filmed 70 feet in the air for the fight Ethan has with the big guy in the rafters. McQuarrie says that for that fight scene, they used 11 different lenses. He used wider lenses over the bad guy's back and longer lenses over Cruise's back to amplify the size difference between the two of them. Cruise was also bending his knees a little to make himself seem even smaller. At the end of the fight, the bad guy gets knocked off the scaffolding by Cruise, and he's about to get impaled, but they cut away, and we never really they never really show what happens. Later, you see the bad guy in the background of a shot, and you can sort of make out that he was impaled. I wonder if he had done the movie now, he would have had a little juice in there.
You think it would have been a little gorier?
A little gorier, yeah. But
you can see, I mean, the body's like falling right for this like thing that's clearly going to impale him, but they just cut away and never address it ever again.
Right. Well, we had some smudges, as McQuarrie likes to call them, in Fallout. So.
Right, yes, yeah.
But I think that scene also really invokes how they were kind of, again, like drifting off of the kind of vibe of Ghost Protocol in terms of making Tom Cruise seem smaller, making him like not necessarily win every fight. And I just love that humor in that scene, and I know you do too.
It's so great, yeah, when the guy just towers over him, which is very reminiscent of the moment in Ghost Protocol when he's breaking out of the prison at the beginning.
Yes,
he goes into the jail and then backs out because this giant guy is walking out.
So good.
It's very similar that way. So McQuarrie and editor Eddie Hamilton had to work for a long time figuring out and refining the opera sequence. They were shooting it on day 1 and also on day 117. They saved the tower where Ilsa climbs into and pulls out the gun, even after they had to strike the opera set from LH2. There are a couple of shots McQuarrie really wanted of Ilsa in the tower, and finally on the last day of production they set up a green screen outside the tower and got the shots he wanted, including the famous one where she lifts up the gun and aims it. Rebecca Ferguson loved that gun that was disguised as a piece of scaffolding so much that she asked if she could keep it, but they said she could only have the rubber one.
Wow. Guys, come on. Give her the gun. It is really fascinating to know that shot has a green screen element because it is so iconic and feels so in the moment.
Yeah.
But I love invisible effects like that.
And there's so many in this movie.
Right. I'm sure we'll talk about them a little later.
Yeah.
By the end of August 2014, they had moved the production to Morocco. And that means it's time for us to talk about the car chase. Cruise and McQuarrie said they learned a lot from the car chase they did together in Jack Reacher and applied it to this one in Rogue Nation. Stunt coordinator Wade Eastwood said because of the nature of the work in the sequence, he had to take Cruise back to basics and reteach him so that in the end, he's even better than he ever was at driving. Every week, they had him at a track practicing stuff like drifting. Oh, so cool.
Yeah. And now, of course, one of our favorite things to discuss, the BMW product placement continues after Ghost Protocol, and it has continued to this day through Fallout and MI7, from what we've seen in the tabloid photos and everything. As McQuarrie says, product placement is what allows them to destroy 12 BMW M3s and 25 1000 RRs because they'd never be able to actually afford that in the budget, which is so awesome.
We should find some commercials because they always have accompanying commercials for each one. We should find those and put them up.
But we always talk about how it's like everybody in the chase has a BMW, but it's so great. I mean, that allows them to go and destroy all these vehicles.
As someone who has destroyed a BMW before, Charles, do you feel a kinship in that regard?
I do, yes. I mean, I love that BMW. My dad's old BMW saved my life when I was however. I had to use my dad's car because it's such a long, convoluted story. My mom couldn't drive stick because she had a broken foot, so then I had to drive the BMW to this event for high school, and then on the way got into this huge accident, and the car was bent in half, and I didn't have a scratch on me. So this car saved my life, and it's basically the same car that he drives in Fallout. It's the same year, everything.
Love that.
Yeah.
So here's a fun tidbit for you, Charles. When Ethan does that 90-degree turn in the car to wipe out the two bikers against the walls of that narrow street in Morocco, they actually made the walls of the building out of foam. The wall also was on a hinge so that it can move in a bit if the stuntman got rammed into it. So that is so cool.
I know. I love that. That's one of my favorite parts in the whole movie. That shot of the car turning 90 degrees and wiping out the bikers is so fucking good.
So good.
All right, you know the part where Ethan and Benji are driving down that epic staircase in the BMW. There were actually ramps added over the steps to make it possible, and then the ramps were removed in post to make it look like stairs again.
Oh, interesting. Some more invisible VFX.
Yeah.
So when Ethan and Benji crashed the BMW, they were actually firing the BMW out of a quote-unquote car cannon, essentially. They did it 3 times, and after the 3rd time, they started to notice there were cracks in some of the buildings they were and they were asked to stop firing the car cannon. Wow. So
I love that.
Yeah. Guys, can you turn off the cannon?
No more car cannon.
No more car cannon.
All right, so now at least they got to do it 3 times. That's not bad.
Yeah.
All right, now let's get into the motorcycles section of the chase. On September 1st, this is 2014, the Hollywood Reporter states that MI5 shut down a major Moroccan highway for 2 weeks. McQuarrie had originally designed a massive 8-minute sequence that involved railroad bridges and driving the wrong way on the highway against oncoming traffic of 18-wheelers. But they kept cutting days and money out of the sequence, so they were constantly struggling with how to pull it off.
Wow. I cannot believe that this version is the lower budget version of any sequence. But anyway, McQuarrie says that he called Eddie Hamilton from the side of a highway in Morocco, and he said he'd just been shooting stuff, and he'd afraid it didn't make any sense. But Eddie said, just keep shooting. It looks awesome. Your instincts are right. Just keep going. So again, this feels like a sort of improvisational sequence, which is really amazing that you can do that on a scale this big.
Yeah. And it all came out. I mean, that sequence is fucking phenomenal.
So cool.
So here's some fun behind the scenes nuggets about the motorcycle chase. The stunt team and the special effects team came up with the special rigs that allowed them to film the motorcycles the way that they did. They added digital cars on the road in post so crews can weave through 2 cars 50 meters apart, but in the end it looks like he's weaving through a highway packed with cars. Crews purposefully hit his knee on the ground during the motorcycle chase and then had to do it several times as they did more takes. They were driving on roads with 2,000-foot drops where if you go over the edge, you're dead.
That does not surprise me at all. I mean, we just saw the footage from 7 where they are on a piece of scaffolding that looks like you could die several ways just by standing on top of it. So that is not surprising at all. So in the middle of shooting all this stuff, Deadline reports on September 5th, 2014, that the villain role for MI5 has been offered to Sean Harris, best known for his work in the Showtime series The Borgias and in Ridley Scott's Prometheus. I mean, I guess he was cast that late. What do you think, Charles?
I don't know. Yeah, is it possible the press just was getting this info at this time? Or, I mean, could they have shot... I feel like they could have shot up to this point without having Sean Harris, right?
I think they could have shot most of the movie without having Sean Harris.
He's not really in the big... I mean, they start with shooting those big action things, and they shot, the opera, and they shot stuff in Morocco. I think it's conceivable that this is when they finally got their Sean Harris cast, Solomon Lane.
Yeah. I think so.
So by the end of September 2014, shooting moved to England. The exteriors of the car driving after the opera sequence, where it's Benji driving and Ethan and Ilsa are in the back seat. The exteriors of the car driving were done in London at 4 a.m. All the guns they were firing were setting off the alarms of local jewelry stores. The interiors of the car driving with Benji, Ethan, and Ilsa were done with green screen at Leavesden Studios.
Cool. They built the vinyl offer record store you see at the beginning of the movie. Cruise's request was to make it look so awesome that people in real life would want to visit the store. Sasha Gervasi, who directed Hitchcock and is a friend of McQuarrie's, had the idea that the message self-destruct sequence would actually be a bomb and blow up the entire store. McQuarrie knew that he couldn't do that because it would kill Ethan, but it gave him the idea of the gas that knocks him out. And of course, Teddy Newton returns as the mission briefing voice, as he did in Ghost Protocol. He's a character designer who had worked with Brad Bird a lot. I think that, as Evan Schiff told us, he was very close to being that voice and got kind of replaced at the last minute. So it could have been a whole different world for Evan. So yeah.
I think this was in the audio commentary. McQuarrie said they also filmed Solomon Lane walking out of the record store, and he lights a match to light a cigarette and blow up the store. This was going to light the fuse that transitions to the opening credits, but structurally it didn't work having the credits come that late. I believe he said they filmed it. I'd love to see that. I don't know if they did. Maybe this is going off of his friend Sasha Gervasi's idea of the self-destructing message blowing up the whole store. So maybe the record store, maybe they didn't film it. I don't know. I didn't quite catch that. I thought he said they filmed it, but I maybe they didn't. What do you think?
Well, they could still have him lighting a cigarette and that light be the fuse.
Yes. True.
So they brought in extra phone booths, those distinctive red phone booths that you see in London, for when Ethan calls into the IMF. Crew says in the commentary, part of a mission movie is celebrating the culture and architecture of each country we're in. And they wanted to celebrate those distinctive phone booths. And yeah, he's in, I think, Piccadilly Circus, and I don't think there's a phone booth there. So, I mean, it's a great shot and a great moment.
Yeah, it's cool that they, want to play up that stuff. It's a really cool visual.
So cool.
In the commentary, McQuarrie talks about how he learned for a mission movie you should keep the scenes of heavy exposition in tight quarters that you can easily reshoot. We've obviously heard him say this many times. So the booth in the record store and the red phone booth in London are two such scenes where they had those lying around throughout production and they ended up reshooting pieces of those scenes.
Oh, I love that. I love those stories. This is a totally random tidbit, but according to First AC Eric Brown, Tom Cruise doesn't like to rehearse. Brown says, more often than not, his first line when we got to set would be like, you guys ready? Let's shoot. So he's ready to go.
I love that. All right, let's move on to the Torus sequence. Very early on in the pre-production process, production designer Jim Bissell put together a board for the look of the movie. A lot of what he put up there was just spitballing ideas, and one thing was the Torus. Well, Cruise saw it and said, oh, cool, we're doing an underwater sequence. And McQuarrie said the underwater shoot for Edge of Tomorrow was a nightmare, and he didn't want to do it ever again, but now he was on the hook. Producer Brian Burke says of the underwater sequence in Rogue Nation, imagine Mission Impossible 1 where Ethan is hanging by a thread. Now remove the thread and don't allow him to breathe.
I love that.
I thought that was a fun quote to include.
Yeah.
So Cruise trained for a month learning how to free dive. Kirk Crack is a free diving expert who trained Cruise and Rebecca Ferguson how to hold their breath for extended periods of time. They went through a breath hold special operations program, which was designed for militaries. There's a behind-the-scenes video you can watch showing Cruise holding his breath underwater for 6 minutes during the training. We will post that in the show notes on our website.
Wow, that is insane. There's a great Business Insider article about the underwater stunt that features an interview with Wade Eastwood. In it, he says, there's no time you don't see Ethan in the film and it's not Tom. He goes on to say that the first part of the underwater stunt involved jumping a 120-foot drop. Then the underwater part of the stunt was filmed in a water tank 20 feet high. He said that there were cameras all over the set to make sure Cruise was okay, and that he would get stressed out because he felt like Cruise was under for too long, although we know that he could hold his breath for an insane amount of time. Eastwood then says, on 2 or 3 occasions, I brought him up because I felt like he was down for too long. He was like, what are you doing? I was right in the moment. I'm acting. And I was like, I know, it was just too real for me and I wasn't comfortable. Sounds like story of Cruise and whatever stunt person who is looking at him at the moment's life together.
Love that. Eastwood recalls Cruise telling him one time after having the actor come up for air, I got plenty of breath. Trust me, I don't want to die. They had 10 days to shoot all the underwater stuff, but training for it started 2 months before production began. Eastwood explains that with this kind of training, you're basically teaching your mind that you don't have to take a breath. Cruise actually blacked out a few times during the training. Eastwood says, that's how you learn your limits. Yowzers.
Wow.
That is intense.
Woo. Eastwood continues, it's a very calming and surreal state being underwater, especially when you're holding your breath for that long. You've gone through training to get your mind to that place where you can control it. It's dangerous because you can get carried away in the acting and you get in such a euphoric and relaxed state being in the character that you forget what you're doing. That was my worry. Ah, yes, that was his worry. That is just insane.
Wow.
Totally.
For the underwater stuff, they built the parts of the set that Ethan touches, but the rest of it was green screen in a tank at London's Warner Brothers Studios Leavesden. They shot all the underwater stuff with the Alexa 65. Cinematographer Robert Elswit says they shot the underwater sequence, quote, with transferred motion, the same kind of thing they did with the spaceships in Star Wars. This was the only way to make Ethan and Ilsa appear to move through space and manipulate them with any real control while they're holding their breath underwater. They transferred movement from the camera to the stationary actors so that Tom appears to be flying through space. Sometimes he actually is, but often he is only moving a few feet against the camera, which is actually creating the sense of motion against the green screen. Several shots required the camera move as much as 6 feet per second. In our interview with Elsbeth, he talks about this more, so if you haven't listened to that, you should definitely check it out. As I've said multiple times, it's one of my favorite interviews. He is hilarious and great.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that they went through all this trouble. It's like they could have just done it anywhere and not had it be underwater, but they went that extra mile, and it's really admirable that they committed in such a big way.
Yeah.
In the commentary, McQuarrie says that Joe Kramer actually wrote a great piece of music for the underwater sequence, but it was ultimately cut because it just didn't make the audience feel like they were underwater. It took the suspense out of it, so they took it out. And I can't imagine that sequence with music now.
Yeah, it just works so well. Yeah, and you can kind of sense that. Like when he pointed that out, it's like, oh, that makes sense. If you heard music, you wouldn't really feel like you were underwater as much anymore.
Yeah.
The underwater sequence was also originally conceived as a oneer, but it would have had some pans and other camera moves that would have allowed for them to cheat and have a few shots stitched together, similar to how they ended up doing the halo jump sequence as 3 shots that were stitched together to look like a oneer. Cruise saw the idea of a oneer underwater in the previs and loved it, but ultimately it just didn't work. It didn't feel like a team sequence, and it didn't have enough suspense. They actually cut together a version of the sequence like that, and Cruise really wanted it, but in the end, story is king, and even Cruise had to admit it wasn't as good.
Wow. So I guess there wasn't going to be any cutaway, because isn't it cutaway to Benji doing his thing
they
too?
realized. I think they realized not cutting to Benji or any other team member. There's just nothing. You have to be able to cut. You kind of have to cut back and forth between two things to have suspense on timing of something. You know what I mean?
Right. To establish what the stakes are outside of. Yeah.
And
exactly.
in the final version, like Benji's in danger if Cruise doesn't get this thing done in time.
Yes.
But if you don't see Benji getting close to being in danger, then there's no suspense there. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's a great point. McQuarrie and Cruise said that they gave their final notes for the VFX in the sequence just days before the premiere, and that they didn't see the final version until they watched it at the premiere, which was in Vienna, which we'll get to, I'm sure, later. But that's just crazy. I also want to tell everybody to be sure to check out our interview with director of photography Pete Romano, who talks all about this sequence and his amazing career as sort of the premier underwater photographer of these types of sequences. Really fascinating interview, and I think we had a really great time talking to Pete.
Yeah, that was episodes 156 and 157, I believe.
Yes.
Oh, I thought this was worth bringing up too. McQuarrie's brother Doug, who is a retired Navy SEAL and advisor on the film, actually drowned when he was in college and came out of a coma in the hospital. There's a really funny story McQuarrie tells in the Q&A podcast with Jeff Goldsmith about how his brother woke up from the coma and said he needed to get up and study, but at this point he'd already graduated. So they even showed him his diploma, and it got passed around the room with the family. And then again, Doug said, "Okay, but I have to get up and study." And this moment inspired them to come up with the part where Ethan falls over the BMW, and Benji says, "Are you sure you're okay to drive? A minute ago you were dead." And Cruz just looks at him confused and is like, "What are you talking about?"
One of the best moments in the movie.
Yeah.
This is pretty interesting. The character of Atlee didn't exist until after they put together the Torus and motorcycle chase. They realized they needed a strong reason for why Ilsa was with Ethan and then suddenly against him. Atlee provided this reason. So we got Atlee and Hunley.
Yes.
And Ethan Hunt.
But Atlee, it's just crazy to think that Atlee didn't come in until this late in the process.
Yes, and we love Atlee. He's a real slime ball.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a very random fun fact for you. McQuarrie's hands make a cameo playing Benji's hands for the insert of the opera tickets when he gets them in the mail.
Wow. That is very random, and I love it. Thank you for that, Charles. Time to talk about the A400. This was shot in early November 2014. Once again, production designer Jim Bissell brought up the model of the A400 as an idea, and McQuarrie jokingly said Cruise could be hanging on the side of it. Cruise immediately went for it and started making calls. Airbus didn't take them seriously at first. They didn't know if the plane could even structurally deal with what they were considering, but they kept at it and eventually figured out how to do it for real. And God bless them for it.
McQuarrie and Cruise revisited Ghost Protocol, and they felt like the Burj was so great and thought, wouldn't it be great if the movie ended with something like that? So they wanted to find the biggest sequence to play for the climax, and the A400 was actually considered for the finale, but it was really just a stunt. It'd be too complicated and expensive to make the A400 the finale because you'd have to include all the actors and build a fake wing and do all this other stuff. At one point, McQuarrie did try to script the finale with the A400, but it was all this stuff you've seen in other movies. He said it felt like a Fast and Furious movie, and it just wasn't Mission Impossible. And if you recall, Fast and Furious 6 had that finale with the airplane on the exceptionally long runway. So there was a meeting with David Ellison, CEO of Skydance, where David Ellison was trying to insist that the A400 belonged in the biggest sequence in the movie, but McQuarrie was eventually able to convince him otherwise. And at one point the A400 was even being considered as a post-credits sequence. What do you think about that?
Holy shit, I did not know that. That is crazy.
I think Joe Kramer even told us that in our interview, too.
I mean, it has one of my favorite Ethan Hunt moments, which is kind of a play off of the moment where he and Paula Patton are racing towards the parking garage at the end of Ghost Protocol.
Is it just the shrug?
The shrug.
Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of playful energy that started from Ghost Protocol has continued in the series since then, and it's so great.
It's so wonderful. And then what a wonderful way to kick off the movie. I just can't imagine it any other place. I know we've heard people say that at one point it was like the second act break even, but I think it's perfect where it ended up. Don't you?
Yes. Yeah, totally. I think it's perfect right where it is.
So for the big stunt, the sequence was shot in 4 short winter days at RAF Wittering Air Base in the English countryside. It was 25 degrees Fahrenheit when Cruise was tethered to the outside of a flying Airbus A400 that reached altitudes of 5,000 feet. And Cruise was just wearing that suit without any substantial thermal protection. In order for him to be able to keep his eyes open against the hard air and any possible debris, Cruise had special contact lenses designed that covered his entire eye. But if he hit a bird, it would have killed him. And the bird. If he saw a bird, the plan was for him to press up against the side of the plane. Any debris on the airfield, any little rock or anything that got sucked into the propeller and hit Tom, it would be traveling at the speed of a bullet, and there's nothing protecting his face. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, DP Robert Elswit had this to say about the safety measures. Tom was in a full-body harness, and he's cabled and wired to the plane through its door. Inside the aircraft was an aluminum truss that was carefully bolted to the plane, which held the wires that went through the door, which held Tom. They were very careful about cleaning the runway so there were no rocks, and he took off in a certain weather condition. He's sort of protected by the way air moves over the wing. So, sort of protected is the key phrase there.
Sort of protected.
Sort of protected, right.
According to that same Hollywood Reporter article, a truss device was built to attach to the plane an RE 35mm film camera with a Panavision anamorphic zoom lens housed in an aerodynamic Netman Systems stabilized head. Elswit and members of the camera crew were inside the Airbus, watching the Airbus mounted camera on a video tap. Elswit could remotely pan and tilt the camera. He said, "There was a helicopter flying next to us. From the helicopter, we were shooting the additional aerial perspective of Tom attached to the door. In the VFX, they erased the Airbus-mounted camera that we were shooting with as it was in the helicopter shot."
Oh my God. What a pain in the ass. Elswit continues in the same article, "The first time they did a test with a dummy. Then they flew with the camera rig, and the day before we went up with a stunt double just to make sure everything was okay. When Tom wants to do something, he'll figure out a way to do it. He's the most obsessive artist. If it couldn't actually be Tom on the plane, I think he wouldn't want the sequence in the movie. That's what happened on the bird for Ghost Protocol. I'm always stunned. What inside of him makes it possible for anybody to do that kind of shit and not be scared shitless? He loves it."
Oh, so great. So they wanted the shot where, as the plane is on its climb, you see the Earth move away from you at a very high speed. So the pilot's angle of attack had to be really steep. There was an incredibly precise margin of error in the throttle. The plane had to be going fast enough to stay airborne, but it couldn't be going so fast that Tom gets torn off regardless of the safety measures they have. Cruise described the experience like this. "I give the thumbs up to camera. He's pushing the throttle forward and we are hammering down that runway and I'm like, holy shit. The force of it. I mean, I was just trying to keep my feet on the ground because I always had it in my mind the image of when the airplane took off, my feet are going to come off. And the force of that wind. You see him trying desperately to keep my feet on the flooring there."
Oh, interesting. So the VFX supervisor, a guy named David Vickery, said, I kind of thought that was a one take and he was going to do it once and then walk away. But he did it 8 times. Seems like he enjoyed it. McQuarrie says he was having the time of his life. On the second take, Cruise got hit by a little pebble and it was embedded in his side. He felt like maybe he broke his rib, and he thought that if he had just landed a little higher, it would have gone through his skull. Good Lord.
In the commentary, McQuarrie points out that all the hangars in the background of the runway were added digitally by the VFX company Double Negative. It's totally seamless and amazing. The next time you're watching the movie, look out for that. Like before, as he's running up to the plane and trying to get on it, and then he's on the wing, and before it takes off, you'll see all these hangars in the background, and they were all added digitally afterwards. It's crazy. Another fun fact, it was Tom's idea to use Cary Grant's suit from North by Northwest for this sequence, which is awesome. Obviously, North by Northwest is a masterpiece. If you haven't seen it, it's my favorite Alfred Hitchcock movie.
Charles, we're hearing all your faves this episode. So we should maybe do a little list of Charles's faves, and we'll put that on the website too. Jeremy Renner's part of the opening sequence was filmed at Leavesden Studios in half a day. Ving Rhames' part was filmed outside on a staircase at Leavesden. McQuarrie told us a funny story about that on our 100th episode, so please go check that out now. And I think we're going to take a break here, right, and come back for the next part?
Yeah, I think we'll come back with part 3 next time. We'll get through different parts of production. We're barreling towards the end of 2014 as they continue production, but we'll pick that up next time. And just want to tell everybody to please sign up for our Patreon, patreon.com/lightthefuse. If you all sign up, then we don't have to waste time on the episodes talk about it anymore. You know what I mean? So please sign up. Bonus content. Every week we do episodes. We did one about William Friedkin recently. Everybody was really liking that one. And actually, we've got a lot of people saying that they'd love us to talk about Jonathan Demme. I know you'd like that, Drew.
Oh yeah, did we not do a Jonathan Demme episode already? I thought we did, but if we haven't,
we really haven't done any episodes about Jonathan Demme. I thought we had as well.
We're getting confused in our old age because we thought we'd done a Schumacher episode.
Yeah. I thought for sure we had done a Joel Schumacher episode as well. But you know what? We'll do Jonathan Demme. We both love Jonathan Demme so much. So, but we did an episode about William Friedkin. We did, what else have we done recently? Patreon episodes. We got a lot of good ones.
Yeah, we've done our top 5 Pixar movies, Time to Luca. We have done, gosh, what else have we done? We've done some good ones lately, and now I can't remember them.
We did the best movies of the year so far. We always keep up with all the latest Mission Impossible news. And of course, we also have the higher level of the Patreon as well, where we do our Skype chat where you can ask us questions. So if you wanted to ask us and talk to us directly about everything that happened at CinemaCon, that was a crazy story. It was so fun for us. So please sign up. And then also, if you can get a shirt or a magnet or a pin or whatever from our TeePublic store, which is linked from our website, LightTheFusePodcast.com. That's in the merch section. You can also check out our episode guide and look at all of our show notes. We've got stuff every week in there for every episode. And, if you don't have any extra cash lying around, then just please write us a review or give us a rating, preferably a 5-star rating. That would be really awesome. And, follow us on social media. We're always doing stuff on social media. So, I think that's about it there. I've got to give a special thank you to Jacob Ballard. So thank you to Jacob for helping us with this episode. And I also want to credit our mixer and editor, Luke. Thank you so much, Luke. And to our music composer, Kevin Blumenfeld, for his legally dissimilar music. And also our intern, Parth Marate. I got to throw out all of our sources as well. Many articles and interviews that we've got found in the trades, which we mention as we go. And then there are other movie websites like Collider and Slash Film. There was a big article in American Cinematographer. We took some stuff from Empire Spoiler podcast, the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast. We also got a lot from the Rogue Nation Blu-ray with the Target exclusive bonus disc, iTunes special features, and of course tweets from Christopher McQuarrie.
Woo! And we'll be back next week with part 3.
Thanks again for listening, everyone. And before we go, another mission, should you choose to accept it, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember that you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at LightTheFusePod, and email us questions or comments at lightthefusepodcast@gmail.com. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds.